everyone, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Rachel Ray, and today is Theory Tuesday, aka Weird and Wacky with Mr. Ray. Say hi, Mr. Ray.
Hi, Mr. Ray.
Today we are going to be working on a kit that I haven't worked on in a very long time, and I just noticed something in the drills, and that's going to bug me. But anyway, this is Kimono by Diymoon Shop. You see them there. Diymoon Shop. DIY Moon Shop. Shop Diymoon. This is a gorgeous kit that I haven't worked on in a very long time, and I don't know why, but I am bringing it out for the POC for Black History event that Mrs. Crochet and Coffee is spearheading over on Instagram and on our Facebook group, Crafters Anonymous, with Mrs. Crochet and Coffee and Rachel Ray. And you can find out more details on either her Facebook or Instagram, and I'll make sure that I link it in the description below. So I am working on this one because this is a beautiful Japanese lady, and I already am working on it. I don't have to start a new kit, because if I started a new kit, I think I'd get yelled at. But anyway, I'm whipping through the whips.
Yeah.
Hashtag whip the whips.
Whip the whips.
So today I'm going to be working on her skin tone, I think. And I'm going to let James tell us the story. This is going to be part 1, isn't it?
I think so, yeah. I think so.
And everything that I have listed here that I'm using, I'm going to have it in the description box below. Now that we have the lighting situated, I think we're ready to go.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, it was because you were talking about this last week, that we should do maybe that Skinwalker Ranch thing, because it's kind of getting topical again, isn't it?
It is.
You know, I think they've got is there like a series from the last year or so? Is it on Netflix or something like that? I haven't actually watched it.
I don't know.
But anyway, I suppose, because when I suggested this ages ago, and you
I'm
said,
scared. I'm scared that somebody's going to come after us.
why is that?
Because they're like, if I say it now, it's going to ruin the whole story. We should just start from the beginning, right?
Yeah. So the last time when you suggested it, I said, "Oh yeah, I think I read that book, you know." But I actually went and bought the book.
Ah.
And it turns out I hadn't read the book. But then it all came flooding back to me, like, and it was in the late 90s, and I was trying to write an essay for college.
Okay.
And someone in the library was like, books are so 20th century, like that's how your parents wrote essays, you know. You need to get into this internet thing. So this was in the kind of late 90s, you know?
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, I'd heard about this internet thing. Please show me more. So the librarian showed me how to access the internet and stuff, you know, to get journals, you know?
Yeah.
And I was a little bit amazed, but of course I didn't actually knuckle down and work hard on my essay. Instead, I went to the less salubrious areas of the internet. And I remember as I was reading the book, I was like, oh, I didn't actually read the book, but I read a load of stuff that George Knapp had written, you know,
Okay.
on the internet. And I read a load of comments on the work that he had written about Skinwalker Ranch, you know? Mm-hmm. And this was so long ago on the internet that I specifically remember looking at this page, you know, and the text was all along the whole length of the page, and it was like nearly a paragraph per sentence. Do you remember that you couldn't really resize it?
Oh, they didn't have like the word wrap.
Yeah, you didn't have word wrap and you didn't have anything. This was like,
You had to like scroll sideways and then go back.
yeah, it was like 1997, and I just remember like being hunched over the computer with my face not far away from like the cathode ray tube that all of them had then, you know? Like the internet was housed in a box on a desk. Do you know what I mean? Like the internet wasn't everywhere. It wasn't on your phone, and it wasn't
He's talking to you young people.
there was no social media.
No.
You know? You still had to go and meet people in person to be disgusted at what you'd seen on the internet or upset at what. At that time as well, you were like everybody understood what the internet was. It was, you know, this place where people could say whatever, you know. So I specifically remember that, and I didn't read the book, and now I'm reading the book, and so the book is what's it called?
Yeah, give us details, because otherwise.
Oh, I've even forgotten the title of it now. I think it's like Skinwalker Ranch, but it's by this guy Colin Kelleher, PhD, and George Knapp.
Does he have a PhD in cryptozoology?
He doesn't, no, but he doesn't have a PhD in zoomorphology.
Zoomorphology
Was the one I have a PhD in,
yeah.
Zoomorphology. No, he has a PhD in biochemistry, I think.
Okay.
And the thing about Colin Kelleher as well is that he's Irish, like.
Yeah, clearly.
Yeah, but genuinely Irish, like from Ireland. Did his PhD work at Trinity in Dublin, you know?
Born and bred.
Yeah, and I guess, I don't know, like you don't know anybody from like the space weirdo world and stuff like that, like, but...
I don't.
Like, do you know who George Knapp is?
You've said his name
before. George Knapp is like a huge name in like UFO circles and stuff like that. He was an investigative journalist that worked for like local... affiliate stations in Las Vegas.
Was he the guy that I said in the last episode ruined that guy's life?
Which
Based
guy?
on his interviews or something, or was that somebody else?
He quite possibly could have. Who?
Yeah.
Why? What's?
I can't remember exactly, but yeah.
But basically,
Maybe you should watch it again.
Back in the late 80s and the
Wink.
early 90s, you know, he broke the story. Well, he was instrumental in popularizing the story of this guy, Bob Lazar. Do you know who Bob Lazar is?
Also sounds familiar, but you'd have to... Sorry, I'm the control group here.
Bob Lazar is a guy who claims that he worked as a scientist at Area 51.
Ah.
Which also the S4 section of Area 51 and all this, yeah? He's still around, like you can find podcasts that he's done recently.
Oh my.
So Bob Lazar is still there. George Knapp is the guy that popularized him. Mm-hmm. And then people sometimes say stuff like, oh, well, he sunk his career, you know, to speak the truth about UFOs. But actually, you know, like maybe speaking the truth about UFOs is what made his career, you know? He's a likable guy. George, you know, and he's still a big deal in UFO lore, but also he's a big deal in the stuff that's happening now around, you know, the whole disclosure thing. Yeah, the Navy thing and all that. And he's a big deal in that because he's got this protege at the moment. I think his name is Kenyon Locklear or something like that. Mm-hmm. And he is basically, all he's doing is rehashing and recutting George Knapp's documentaries. And they feature George Knapp. You can actually go to Amazon Prime and they've got a Skinwalker Ranch documentary. And like almost none of the footage is new stuff. It's stuff that George Knapp shot 10, 15 years ago, you know?
Okay.
He's getting better at making documentaries, but again, he's leaning so heavily on George and the work that George has done. Mm-hmm. And as I said, George is in most of his documentaries as well. Mm-hmm. You know. Mm-hmm. The other thing about him as well, about that guy Locklear, is that he's a former military guy as well, which is always suspicious. You know.
Yeah.
Always. So. So that's one of the characters. That's one of the guys that wrote the book, yeah? Mm-hmm. The other guy then is Colin Kelleher. And Colin Kelleher is a what do they call it? Like a biochemist, yeah?
Right.
PhD in biochemistry. And he used to work for this organization called the National Institute for Discovery Science, NIDS. NIDS, yeah. And what they was... They were set up by this guy called Robert Bigelow. And Robert Bigelow is the last character in this story, essentially, you know, in the beginning of the story.
Okay.
So what happened was that this family, the Gorman family, they got this ranch. They had some inexplicable experiences, and then Robert Bigelow ends up stepping in and buying it off them and setting up this NIDS, this National Institute for Discovery Science.
Right. And this is in like Nevada or something?
This is in Utah.
Oh.
They set it up, and he's from Las Vegas. He owns a company, I think they're called Budget Suites of America.
Oh.
And they're huge, like he's the original. And then in the 90s, let's go into Bigelow a little bit because he's a big character in this as well. Like in the 90s, maybe even the late 80s or the early 90s, Bigelow started a company, Bigelow Aerospace, you know? Mm-hmm. And Bigelow Aerospace was supposed to be, well, they are a company. He said at the time that they were going to be building space hotels, you know? Mm. So they were designed to look into and research space hotel stuff. Yeah?
Okay.
It's not as crazy as it sounds. Like he was going to make inflatable modules. So you would build these, essentially they would be balloons, you know? Mm-hmm. And you would send them up into space uninflated, and they would have like a hard bit at either end with hardware and stuff on them, you know? Mm-hmm. And then when you get them up there, you inflate them to a really high pressure, and the walls basically stay pressurized and stuff. Now you're like thinking that's science fiction, but actually Bigelow Aerospace sent a module to the International Space Station, and they sent it there about maybe a year or two ago. Mm-hmm. And they're using it mainly for storage and as proof of concept, but it's already gone past its trial date. Huh. And it's still on the end of the International Space Station.
Okay.
Yeah. Sometime in the 90s, Harry Reid, who is a former senator from Arizona, I believe, he got invited by Bigelow to go to a conference, and then through a series of what would you say, funding proposals and stuff in committees in Congress, Bigelow Aerospace got offered the contract to look into UFO stuff, which is something that Bigelow has always been interested in. Okay. He talks cryptically about his experience with UFOs and his family's experience with UFOs and the paranormal, and that's what's got him very interested in this subject, you know?
Okay.
Bigelow as well, the important thing to note here is that he is the original billionaire space pirate, you know? But he's the one that people haven't heard about.
Right.
You know what I mean?
He did it before it was cool.
He did it before it was cool. The project that Reid ended up getting Bigelow involved in, where he was getting governmental information on UFOs and he was supposed to be looking into whether they were a threat or whatever, that becomes a thing called, I think, OSAP, and then after that it gets taken back by the government. I think OSAP might have been a government-run program. It gets taken back by them and it becomes ATIP, and ATIP is where Luis Elizondo and all of these guys come out of.
Okay, honey, you're giving me lots of names and no story.
What's
going on?
He's a big deal in UFO circles, this Bigelow dude.
Okay.
Yeah?
Yeah.
And he's always been pumping money into the research of it. Before he set up this National Discovery Institute for Discovery Science thing, which is looking into, whose stated aim is to like look into paranormal and UFOs and all that, you know? Before he set that up, he was spending huge amounts of money researching this valley in Norway that has inexplicable lights and stuff like that, you know?
Okay.
And then basically, I think when this thing came up in Utah, it was close to his home. He could go and visit it easier, and it was, you know, it was just easier for him to deal with, and it was more or less the same kind of experience. Lots of people having inexplicable experiences in a very small geographic area.
Okay.
Yeah?
Okay. Because you haven't told us what happened.
Oh, we'll get to that.
Okay.
Oh, we will.
It's been 15 minutes.
I just think it's important to talk about who these guys are and what's going on here. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but we got to catch people like, You got to catch them and get them hooked in.
Okay.
They're probably tuned out by now.
I'm not good. This is bad craft. I didn't actually make any notes. I'm just going to do all this off the top of my head, like so.
Wonderful.
I think the notes are holding me back, baby.
Is it? 15 minutes later.
Yeah. So the story here is it takes place on this place, Skinwalker Ranch, yeah, and it's in the Uintah Valley in Utah.
Uintah Valley?
Uintah, yeah. That's what it's called.
You want a valley or you need a valley?
I don't know.
I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
Anyway, it's, I guess, the indigenous people of the area are called the Ute.
Ah,
okay.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and Utah itself is named after them.
Oh.
Yeah?
Right.
Now, there's a whole history in the Uintah Valley of inexplicable stuff happening. Yeah? There's this...
Like what?
Like in 1776, these two Catholic monks, Spanish Catholic monks, came from California, and they crossed over into Utah, and like on the East Coast, you know, the nascent America is taking shape, like, you know, whereas over here it's still very much outside of any of that, you know.
Europe, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And these monks are, as far as we know, they would have been probably one of the first kind of Europeans to visit the area. And they report seeing kind of inexplicable lights in the sky and stuff like that. You know, so that's one of the first reports of very unusual activity in the area. Yeah. The Ute people themselves are some of the first Native Americans to get horses from the Europeans.
Okay.
And at that very early stage, like in the early 1800s, it absolutely revolutionizes their way of life, you know? Like, they had always been nomadic hunter-gatherers, but now they've got the power of the horse underneath them, you know? And basically, they start becoming more aggressive with their native neighbors, you know? And they start raiding them more often. They become more warlike and more important for territory and stuff like that. And at the same time, as time goes on, they're coming up and more against European encroachment into their area.
Right.
You know? Now, I'm by no means an expert in this, obviously, you know? And I don't think I can really comment on it too much without getting into hot water here, you know?
Right.
But basically, what happens over the next while is that, like, by the 1840s or 50s, the outliers of the Mormons that are being pushed further and further west, they end up scouting out around the Utah area. There's some really interesting... I actually watched a documentary by a guy from Brigham Young University, you know, in Utah, and he said like that they showed up in kind of late spring, early summer, and they were like, this place is the bomb, look how green it is and everything, you know. And then they were writing letters back, and then by the time those letters had got to the other people and they were like, let's head out there,
they were dead.
The land had got arid. You know. And then by the time the guys arrived, there was snow. It was snowing, and they were like, okay. We might have been a bit early on, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But this goes on anyway, and then there's all different stuff happens over time. Obviously, they push the Ute more and more into smaller and smaller areas, into reservations, you know.
Yeah.
And I believe in 1886 they sign a treaty with the Ute where they give them the area of the Uintah Valley and the surrounding area as a reservation. Yeah. Then in the 1870s, Mormons from the Utah area are starting to push up into this area, but also then they find hydrocarbons in the valley. And like hydrocarbons are like oil related stuff, you know?
I was thinking of geysers.
No, they find this stuff called Oh golly, I should have really taken notes. Gillisine or something like this, you know? And it's a specific type. It's named after this guy, Gill, you know, or something, you know? He's a scientist, dude. Anyway, they find this specific hydrocarbon, and it absolutely revolutionizes the making of varnishes and paints. Yeah?
Okay.
So it can be mined and sold for money. So what happens next is that the Ute people get kind of pushed into a smaller area of the Uintah Valley. There's a lot of arguments about these illegal miners. People get involved. In the meanwhile, this is the period when the American cavalry is arriving, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And the American cavalry bring with them these buffalo soldiers. Do you know what the story is with those?
Honestly, I can't remember, but is it connected to this?
Yes.
Okay.
So, it is.
I promise we will get to the story.
It is later on. It is
eventually.
Later on. Yeah. No, you need the background. You need the background. So the buffalo soldiers are freed slaves that have joined the American cavalry. About 20% of the American cavalry at the time would have been these buffalo soldiers, you know, and they get the name from the Native Americans, who thought that, you know, because they had darker skin and curly hair, that they they fought fiercely and stuff like that, you know. So they started calling them buffalo soldiers, and that's what the crack is. They're staying at they're staying in this place in Duchesne County. Yeah, all of this takes place in an area called Duchesne County. That's where the ranch is.
Okay.
Part of the ranch may have been an area, or is recorded as an area, where that was a burial ground for these buffalo soldiers that fell in battle and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one of the first things about it. And that's basically, this whole thing it happens in this area. It's related to all of this upheaval. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So then, I guess the next thing, and like obviously with the mining stuff and all that, there's these boomtown, you know, you get these boomtowns coming up, you know?
Right.
Yeah, where they're just thrown up, and they're like servicing all of the miners that are flooding into the area and all this kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And this is happening in kind of the 1870s and 1880s and stuff like that. And there's this area that later gets dammed up and becomes a reservoir, and it's called Bottle Hollow. And it's literally just a little, what would you say, almost like the Grand Canyon kind of thing, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And they dam it at one end then, and it becomes a reservoir. But basically they call it Bottle Hollow because people used to just throw all the empty bottles in there and stuff like that. And it's somewhere in this area, this is adjacent to the ranch, and it's somewhere in this area that the Buffalo Soldier burial ground is. Yeah? So that's kind of the milieu that we're going to come into. So I guess the next thing is, what is a skinwalker? What is a skinwalker?
Kind of like a doppelganger.
Like a doppelganger?
Or something that takes the form of a person, but isn't. You can tell that they're not actually human.
They used to be human. At one point they were human. They can take the form of animals. And then they'll have a heightened sense of smell, or, you know what I mean? They'll be more...
I thought it was they were trying to be human, not that they were human, and now they're not.
They actually were human. And when I went to look into this, I thought that basically it was like that, you know, you'd get good skinwalkers and bad skinwalkers, but it doesn't seem that that's the way. A skinwalker...
They're all bad.
Yeah, a skinwalker is always malevolent.
Yeah.
Always, you know. It's because what they've done is they've had to make these huge sacrifices to gain this ultimate power, you know?
Okay.
And the power allows them to take on the form of these animals, but it also allows them to live in a certain way beyond time and space.
Oh.
You know? They basically... They have this just enormous power, and to get this enormous power they have to sacrifice something in their life. And typically what that is that they would have to kill an immediate member of their family, go through a ceremony and murder a sibling or something like this, or a mother or a father, I guess, you know?
Yeah.
And then there's all these different stories. Then in the book about Skinwalker Ranch, like they talk to a load of kind of anthropologists and stuff that study youth folklore and youth culture, you know? And some of them are Native American as well. And it's really strange. Like one of them says, the thing about it is that, you know, everyone's willing to talk to you about everything, but nobody is really willing to talk to you about skinwalkers, like,
No.
because the very act of talking about them can draw them on you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like when you're giving them power, talking about them, mentioning their name, somewhere in their space, you know, in the place that they live, in this other dimension beyond time and space, their spidey senses start going off, you know? And they can come and kind of invade your mind or whatever. Yeah.
Okay.
There's also another interesting part where they think that the Skinwalker that's at Skinwalker Ranch would have come from the early period after the Ute get horses and start harassing their neighbors. That one of the neighboring tribes would have made a deal with a Skinwalker to give them that area if they take revenge on the Ute, because it's right where the Ute at that time were living, you know.
Yeah.
And later on, it becomes the area that they're pushed into as a reservation. And there's this anthropologist saying that he's definitely heard that from certain people or whatever. But then they talk to like a tribal leader, and the tribal leader like goes, "That's crazy. The only thing you do with a skinwalker is murder it, because you can't make a deal with a skinwalker. Like, what are you going to offer it? Temporal stuff? It lives beyond time and space. Like, you know, it's not interested in what you can offer it now. It's interested in power throughout all time, you know? And they're usually tied to a specific geographic area as well, as far as I understand. In this case, the skinwalker is supposed to live in this canyon that's adjacent to the farm. Yeah? And there's a history in Ute culture of drawing pictographs and stuff like that. And the guys from the book went to the Ute Indian Council or whatever for the area, and asked them if they could go and explore this canyon. And the guys were like, nobody's been in that canyon in 15 generations. No. And yeah. And they were like, but we want to know what's down there. And they're like, you're not listening to us. Nobody knows what's down there. And there's a reason nobody knows what's down there. Just leave it alone.
Right.
You know, you do not want to go and wake this up. You know, that kind of way. So that's the kind of story with that. There's other stories then, just to get into it a little bit, like there's one story where this do you know reservation police force? They're a specific police force.
Okay.
They're a specific police force that they have their own laws and rules and stuff, and they basically police the reservations, you know. They're usually members of the Native American community.
Makes sense.
There was one of them who was driving around the Uintah Valley one day, and on a certain section of road, he thought he saw something out of his passenger side window, and he looked out the window, and he said just at the edge of his vision, a few feet away from the car, was the middle of the night. He could have sworn that he saw this guy wearing a white mask, a white elongated mask, like a ceremonial mask, and he was staring in the car with these red eyes, and he was basically keeping pace with the car, which was going 80 on a highway.
Whoa.
And he said, like, he looked over and he was like, what the? And just looked over again, and it was still there, and looked over a third time, and it was gone. You know?
Yeah.
And he was like, man, I gotta get more sleep before these night shifts and stuff like that. Yeah. Then he, about a week later, exactly the same thing happened to him, and on exactly the same stretch of road. And he was freaked out, so he said it to a colleague when they were having coffee. And the colleague said, oh my God, I actually thought I was going insane. That's happened to me 3 times. Yeah. How freaky is that? He said that it hasn't happened since. It just happened the 2 times, but every time he drives past that area, drives down that stretch of highway, He's absolutely bricking it. Like,
Yeah.
very, very worried. Now, there's another story that I read where there's this family. It's a mom, a dad, and like a teenage girl, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And they're visiting friends of theirs on the reservation, and they're driving home. It's kind of late at night, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
And they come down to this, you know, they drive down and they get to a junction, slow down, put the car in second, check both sides, and as the driver, who's the dad, you know, looks out of the driver's side car,
Mm-hmm.
he suddenly sees this guy step out from behind a bush, and the guy is wearing just a pair of boots and jeans and a blue and white check shirt,
Mm-hmm.
and he's got his hands raised above his head like this, like, you know, stick 'em up style,
Mm-hmm.
except that his hands are covered in hair, and his whole face is covered in hair, and he looks like he really needs a shave and a shower and everything like that.
Yeah.
Except he's got these kind of red bloodshot eyes, and he's standing there with his hands above his head and everything.
Mm.
And the dad is like, that is freaky, and he takes off. But the guy keeps pace with the car, and it's like he's floating along behind the car, and the dad is picking up speed, and it's still outside of the driver's passenger, the outside of the driver's window.
Mm-hmm.
And the mom is looking at it, the dad is looking at it, and they're all panicking, and it's just there with its hands above its head, dressed like a human, but with a face that's like completely hairy. Like, you know, people whose beards go all the way up to their eyes?
Yeah.
That's the impression I got. And he said it wasn't a gorilla or anything because it, you know, it had a human nose, like it looked like a human. It was
Also, that's Utah.
it was just covered in hair, but with the hands above the head, like, so it follows them along for about
Some creepy anime demon stuff.
yeah, isn't it? And it follows them along for about 5 or 10 miles, and then it just disappears into the night. As soon as they leave the reservation, it just disappears, you know.
Okay.
And again, I think this could be down to them being tied to certain geographical areas. Yeah.
Yeah.
So about a week later, they're at home in their house, and they hear this low kind of drumming coming from the back of the yard.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, they've got a fence, obviously, around that property. And on the other side of the fence, they can just make out these three kind of shadowy characters. Like, they don't seem to have any form, but you can just make out this blackness, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And they're there, and they seem to be drumming. And they're drumming away nice and lowly, nice and slowly, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And then they put the drums down, and they start running at the fence and trying to climb over it. But it's almost like the fence extends up beyond what you can see, and they keep getting to the top and being pushed off, like they can't climb over the fence, and they keep trying to climb over the fence.
Mm-hmm.
And then eventually they go back to the drumming, but this time they're chanting low as well.
Mm.
And everyone in the house is obviously freaked out. So they phone their friend on the reservation, and she's like going, yeah, that's not possible. Like, you know, this is a Native American thing. They don't bother you, you know?
Yeah.
And they're like, well, something's happening. So anyway, she had to come over and do a ceremony and cleanse the space and stuff. Creepy. And I guess that's the background to all of this whole thing.
Wasn't there animal mutilation as well? Yeah. We're only getting started.
We're only getting started.
So that's the part of this legend, this story, this whatever you want to call it, that I know is about farmers in the area and what was happening to cattle.
Yeah, I mean,
if you're squeamish, this is okay.
There's no cattle mutilation in this bit.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is it in the next part?
Yeah, I mean, I'm about a third of the way through the book. I really should have done notes, to be honest. But I'm about a third of the way through the book, and
okay. Well, we're 35 minutes in anyway.
Okay.
So we'll let you know if there's any kind of graphic stuff coming up.
Yeah, I mean, it's not that graphic. I'm not that good a storyteller, but so the family that took this So there's this family, right? And I think they're from maybe New Mexico.
Is this the same family?
This is the family that buys. No, this is a different family. That was
fence.
just an anecdote. Like,
Oh, okay.
yeah. So this is there's this family, and they're called the Gorman family, right?
Right.
Now, I've listened to a few podcasts about this as well while I was doing, dishes and cooking and stuff like that. And all of them are like, oh, well, you can find their name out. That's their, assumed name for the book, but you can find their own name out. But we're going to use the Gorman family, to respect their privacy and stuff. And to be honest, it's not that hard to find out their names. Do you know what I mean? Their actual real names. In fact, one of the podcasts I listened to used their real name. I'm going to use Gorman.
Yeah.
Because Gorman is actually my grandmother's surname.
Oh.
So I just, so I got to use Gorman.
Great. Now everybody knows who you are.
The Gorman family are originally from kind of New Mexico,
Mm-hmm.
But they wanted to move up. They wanted to move somewhere quieter. And in the book it says as well, like it says it a few times, that they wanted to move away from their neighbours' prying eyes and from small towns and stuff like that. But like they're living in the middle of nowhere. Do you know what I mean? Like the highway passes by their house. Or by the 50-acre farm, 50 acres, what am I talking about? It's somewhere in the region of 500 acres.
Yeah.
Right? Which is about maybe 230 hectares.
It's a lot.
For people in Europe. It's a large farm. But it's not as large as a lot of those cattle farms up there,
Okay.
Because what they specialise in is kind of bloodstock and stuff like that. Like they specialise in growing high-class bulls for breeding.
Right.
Bulls and other things. So where other farms that are working on beef or whatever, they might have, hundreds of heads of cattle.
Yeah.
These guys are only likely to have maybe 50 of each, that kind of way. Like they're not going for volume, they're going for quality.
Right.
And then they'll be selling those on for breeding or to improve blood stock in other people's herds,
Mm-hmm.
Like they could sell one of their bulls for, a couple of grand. That kind of way.
Mm-hmm.
Like these are high value animals. They breed Black Angus,
Mm-hmm.
and they also breed Cimarron. I think I really should have taken notes, but they breed these two breeds of cattle,
Mm-hmm.
and these cattle now, they are the limousines of cattle breeds.
Right.
That was
in the States.
Anywhere. I mean, we have Black Angus here, we have Cimarron here,
What about Kobe? But Kobe's only Japanese.
Kobe's, I think, I don't know, is it a breed so much as a way of rubbing rice wine into... Is that Wagyu? Am I thinking of Wagyu?
I think you're thinking of octopus.
Anyway.
You had to massage the tentacles for...
Yeah, as I said, these are fancy breeds. They are the limousine of cattle breeds.
Right.
And that's a joke for all the cattle breed nerds out there.
Because there's a breed called limousine.
There's a breed called limousine.
Oh dear.
I should have just let it hang there and see.
Oh, boy.
I should have left it hang there and see. So they're breeding these breeds, right?
Yeah, breeds.
Yeah, they're breeding. Now they buy this ranch because it's secluded. They can be a thing. They've got about a mile of track to get to the highway that it's on.
Mm-hmm.
The family that owned it before, they had owned it for like 60 years. It's suggested that maybe they inherited it. They weren't that interested in it anyway. They just paid people every once in a while to go up and maintain the fence lines and stuff like that,
Okay, yeah.
Which is weird because, like, when the guys visited, the farmhouse was serviceable,
Mm-hmm.
Like it could do with a fixer-upper, but there was big, heavy, like, hardware locks on the inside and the outside of all the windows. And that kind of tweaked their suspicion, and they said that to the family, and the family was like, well, we never lived there, it's just, some guys go up for a week and do some work or whatever, do you want it or what? Anyway, it's got what they want, and it's at a good price, so they take it.
Okay.
And then it's coming at the autumn of 1993.
Mm-hmm.
And they come up from New Mexico and they bring up all of their, cattle and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And they're there one day and they've unloaded the cattle. And you know the way these things work, like they've got a barn and they've got a kind of corral. And then, beyond that, there's all the fields and the farmhouse is right there. You know the setup I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they've got all the cows and calves and stuff like that inside in the corral that they've just offloaded. And they want to get them settled in before the Utah winter really kicks off. You know?
Right.
So they're there, everything's cool, and then they're like, oh wow, what is that in the distance, And this is like, it's...
Is this day one, or is this
This
like
is
week
day
one?
one, they just arrived.
Okay.
And this is, I swear there's someone outside that window.
Shut up.
They're there, and
Do you see this? Do you see what he's doing to me?
no, honestly, but there's
What the heck? What are you talking about? No, there's no one outside.
but
Wait.
there's so the way it's like that flat country that goes into kind of the mesas, you know what I mean? Where it's like along one end of their property as well is like this ridge that they call Skinwalker Ridge, and a lot of stuff happens there. And kind of the place that the Skinwalker is supposed to live is just beyond it, I think,
Okay.
So they're there and they look out in the distance and they see, what is that? A coyote? And it starts padding towards them, It's a couple of 100 yards out. And it's coming closer and closer, and they're like, no, that's a bit bigger than a coyote. Is it a wolf? Now that it's coming closer, I think it might be a wolf. And it comes in and it stops about 100 yards away. And it just sits there and it's calmly looking at them. And it's looking at them for ages and they're looking at it. And then it gets up again and it pads closer to them. And it gets within maybe 20 or 30 yards and it sits down. And then they're like, that is actually the biggest wolf I have ever seen in my life. But they're relatively calm. Because the wolf is kind of exuding this calm, It's not, it's not doing anything. It's perfectly still. It's just staring at them with these eyes. It's not growling. It's not giving them any signals that it's, that it's anything other than just this Zen master type.
They have a bunch of cattle. Wouldn't they, like, have their guns drawn? Because, like...
They mentioned this in the book that they didn't feel in any way threatened. Like, the wolf is kind of adjacent to the corral, where all the calves are and stuff. But it's not making any look. It's just staring right at them, And then it pads towards them and they start thinking, this must be someone's pet. Like, it's way too big for a wolf. It's huge, But it's so calm and it's so well trained or whatever, And it comes over and it walks in kind of amongst them, And even, so there's the mom, the dad, and the son, But there's also the grandfather. And will I give them names? Will I do their name? I think the dad is called Tom. The mom is called Ellen. The son is called, I'm not even joking, Tad. Not even Ted, Tad. And the grandfather then is Ed,
Okay.
So the wolf comes and pads in amongst them, and Ed puts his hand out, and the wolf gives it a bit of a smell, and he like pats its head, and he goes, this has got to be someone's pet, And the wolf pads over close to the corral and sits down again, and it's looking at them, and they're looking at it, and then it gets up, and it turns around calmly, and it grabs one of the calves whose head is through the bars of the gate, and it just grabs it, and it's basically grabbed onto this cow's face, to this calf's face.
Yeah.
So Tom runs over, and he just hits it a kick, and it doesn't move, And then Ed comes in with like, I don't know, like a stick or whatever, and he starts hitting the cow, Meanwhile, Tom runs back to the cab of the truck, and he comes back with a .357 Magnum. I had to look that up.
What the hell is that?
A .357 Magnum is Dirty Harry's gun.
Oh.
It is more powerful than a 9mm, I'll have you know. It is a massive gun, really. It's a hand cannon.
Yeah.
And he shoots the wolf in the chest. nothing happens. He shoots it again in the chest, nothing happens. And he's like, am I actually shooting at this, you know?
Right.
And a third time he shoots it, and the wolf does not even flinch, just keeps with its jaws locked onto this calf's face, you know? And he shouts at the son, he's like, Tad, get my 30-06, you know? Which I think of as a Tom Waits gun, because it's in Tom Waits songs. And I don't really know what it is, but I gather it's quite a gun. So in goes Tad to the house, and he comes out with this 30-06, and your man shoots the wolf with it right in the chest, and he literally sees a chunk of flesh come off the wolf, and then the wolf is like, oh no, this is crap, and it lets go of the calf's face, and the wolf just like looks at him really calmly, and then starts padding off. Just looks at him, turns around, and starts padding off in the distance.
A massive hole in its chest.
So,
Okay.
so the dad and the son, Tom and Tad, start following the wolf, you know? And the wolf kind of picks up speed and starts putting distance between them, you know? And it runs down to, at the end of, like, let's say the farmyard, right? At the end of the farmyard, there's a kind of cosp of cottonwood trees, which I had to look up. They're a type of willow, apparently. But there's this kind of, you know, small wooded area, yeah?
Yeah.
And they follow the wolf into the wooded area, and they can see him, like, run into the woods, and it's putting a bit of distance ahead of them, and they get into the wooded area, and there it is just in the distance, almost like it's waiting for them to see it, you know? And they follow it down again, and it goes around, and this goes on where the wolf is just ahead of them, you know? But it seems to be waiting for them, wanting them to follow it. And they follow it through the cosp of trees and down onto the bank of this river. And this time they can't see where the wolf is. It's gone, yeah? But they can clearly see its footprints in the mud of the river. And they follow those along to the end. And then suddenly, in the middle of the mud bank, they just disappear. They don't find any blood. They don't find anything. It didn't look like the wolf was distressed or anything. It just, literally the footprints just in the middle of a mud bank, poof, disappeared. Yeah? So poof, the wolf is gone. Yeah?
Yeah.
And the dad says to the son, he's like, son, I honestly cannot explain what's happened here, you know? But there must be some logical explanation. Now come on, let's get back and get some dinner, you know? Literally just like that.
Let's go eat that calf.
Yeah, so they walk back, and the calf is a little bit damaged, you know? It's got lacerations on its face and whatnot. So it really happened, you know? Now, this is their first day in the house.
Yeah.
Like, I'd have been gone at that stage.
Gone.
Like, if you shoot a wolf with 2 guns and it does nothing, there's something weird going on here. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But anyway, they put all their money into it, and they need to get about breeding cattle and stuff.
Right.
Yeah? Okay. So, what happens then is that weird kind of inexplicable stuff start happening around the place. Yeah? The mother, Ellen, she works in insurance in the local town. So she's driving in and out to town, you know, to go to work.
Yeah.
Yeah. So she drives in one day and she's coming home, and she gets to the gate at their property. You know, it's maybe a mile away down a road, you know, like down a dirt road. And she gets out and she opens the gate and she drives in and she shuts the gate and she closes it, and she gets back in the car, and just as she's about to start the car, she sees this shadowy figure step out of the bushes beside her, and she looks out, and she's in a regular, like, I think they say it might be a Toyota Camry or something like that, you know?
Yeah.
So she's not in like a huge 4x4 or anything. She's in a regular car. And like, this wolf is, its head is over the car. It is an absolute monster of a wolf. And it just walks out of the bushes, and it's like, and it walks around the car, and she's absolutely freaked out. And just as it's walking around one side, you know, she's following it around.
Yeah.
And off in the bushes, just kind of outside what her headlights are illuminating. This is at twilight, like, is another creature, and this one has like the body of a smaller dog with the head of a larger dog, and she can just make it out because you know that red glowy thing that happens when the headlights catch irises that are really open.
Yeah.
She can make it out, and it's just standing there, crouched over, staring at her while this massive wolf walks around the car. And then just like that, the two of them just pad off silently into the bush.
Ew.
And she has to drive down to the house, you know. And she thinks that this is the same wolf that they saw the first day they were there.
Yeah.
They were in the house maybe a few weeks at this stage. Yeah. Then stuff starts happening. Like,
more stuff.
she can't find, like, poltergeist type stuff.
Okay.
She can't find her keys, and then they're in the microwave, you know?
Yeah.
Where did I put my coat, you know? And then it shows up 2 days later. I thought that...
It's in the freezer.
Yeah, stuff like that. Like, and wait a minute. I thought I had the stuff I was going to cook dinner with there, and now it's back in the press, you know what I mean? And she doesn't know if she's going crazy or what, you know? And then one day, your man comes in, Tom, you know, and he's out fixing fences, and his fence post digger has disappeared. Do you know what these are like?
Oh, the
hole diggers, like pencil. Yeah, they look like scissors, almost like a scissors.
Yeah, they're scissors for the ground.
Yeah, they're scissors for the ground, essentially, like. But they're quite heavy because they got to drive into the ground. Like, they can be like 50 or 60 pounds.
Like iron or something.
Yeah, they can be 30 or 40 kgs kind of thing, you know.
Okay.
And that's gone missing. And like literally, he was like dug the post hole, put the post in, you know, kicked in the dirt with his feet, you know, or whatever. And when he turned around to grab it, it's gone. And he couldn't find it anywhere. And then he goes in and says this to her. And then she says, oh my God, and starts telling him about the things that are happening in the house. And at this stage, they're getting real suspicious about stuff.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Again, if any one of these incidences had happened, I'd have been out of there quicker than you could say.
Quicker than a fart.
Quicker than, I don't even know. Something that's really quite quick. Quicker than a dire wolf. Like, that's what they're talking about as well. They're saying, like, that these things are, you know, they're as big as dire wolves, which are like some of the megafauna that passed away
Obviously
during the last...
Yeah,
they 10,000 years ago, they went extinct, you know?
Yeah.
But, so that's the crack with that. Very unusual stuff. Just before the winter snows hit, they have a nephew called Dave, right? And Dave is about the same age as Tad, like, you know, kind of mid-teens, you know, that sort of way. And he comes to visit because he's a city slicker, and he wants, you know, his parents think it would benefit him to learn a bit of ranching, you know?
Okay.
Or spend some time doing hard, honest work, that kind of thing, you know? So he comes to visit. And one day they're out...
Sounds like the start of a horror movie.
Yeah. And one day they're out, right?
Yeah.
Riding around looking after the cattle, as you do. And they come over a kind of a rise in the land, and there they see this RV, you know? Like, it's dark now. It's just after twilight, yeah?
Yeah.
And it's kind of dark, but they can see the headlights, like the red lights at the back and the white lights at the front, you know?
Okay.
And Tom is like, oh man, this must be some hunters or something on my property, you know? I better go over there and just put them straight, like, you know?
Yeah.
And he figures it's no big deal. Probably local people, when there was no one looking after the property, you know, thought that they had free reign and stuff like that.
Right.
And they could come down and check it out. But, you know, now it's owned. He's just like, doesn't want them near his cattle.
Yeah.
Like, he's trying to run a serious cattle breeding operation here. And they start kind of riding towards the RV. And the RV starts driving away from them. And they pick up speed. And the RV keeps going. And then they notice that the RV is actually driving across open range, you know? Whereas, you know, it's not on a road. Like, they thought it was on the road, but actually it wasn't. So now they're following it across the fields. And every time it gets to a fence post, it just seems to levitate up in the air and go over it and land back in the ground.
Okay.
And they keep going after it. And then as it comes to the edge of the property, and they're riding even faster to try and catch up with it. Mm-hmm. And then it rises up off the ground and turns to the side. And they see that it's not actually an RV at all. It's actually an RV-sized Tic Tac with lights on it. It's a
UFO.
It's a large UFO thingy. Yeah, of your classic UFO shape.
Uh-huh.
And it just... Oh, it doesn't go... It just takes off into the sky nice and calmly and slowly.
Oh.
Because it knows they can't follow it on the horse, I guess. You know?
Mm.
So they get home, and the next day Dave's parents phone and they're like, Dave is not having a good time working on your ranch. And we said it would make a man of him, but honestly, he's real freaked out. So that's the end of that.
Okay.
Then so this is the last story from this bit, you know? So what happens is that...
You're going to leave us on a cliffhanger?
No, I'm going to leave... Yeah, do you know, I want to leave it on a cliffhanger, like, because after this bit, it gets weird. So,
it hasn't been weird yet.
So the first dustings of snow have come, you know? And Ellen's...
It's winter, 1993.
It's winter, yeah, and Ellen's inside in the house, you know? Mm-hmm. And she's having a nice cozy time, like, there's a fire on in the stove, and, you know, there's real good food cooking, and she's just waiting for, what's his name? Tom is actually away selling cattle at the moment.
Okay.
He's in a different state, and he's just down there wheeling and dealing, selling Black Angus and Cimarel, you know?
Yeah.
And she's in there and she's like, oh yeah, dinner will be in about 15 minutes, smells fantastic. And she looks out the window and she sees this RV that's at the edge of the property, right by where those willow are, you know? Mm-hmm. The cottonwoods or whatever. And this RV has, you know, one of those big windows in the side of it?
Yeah.
It has a big window in the side of it, and she can see that there's a kind of a desk inside the RV. And she can see the red light at one side and the white lights at the other side, you know? And then suddenly into view comes this guy who's dressed all in kind of black. And he comes into view and he sits down at the desk. And he starts doing paperwork. Like literally starts doing paperwork. You know, he's like picking up paper and he's checking things and then he's cross-checking them and then he's writing down, you know, notes and stuff. And he does all this paperwork. And then he basically gets it and, you know, stacks it away and he puts it in the outbox or whatever they do. I don't know. And he goes over and she can just see a door open in the side of the RV. Mm-hmm. And he has to kind of duck to get down out of the car, out of the RV. And when he comes out the other side and he stands up, everything from his shoulder down to his kind of knees is illuminated by the light coming out. And this guy's got to be over 7 foot tall, you know? Mm. And she can see him all dressed in his lovely black kind of, you know, tightly fitting suit. And he basically kind of straightens his cuffs, you know? Goes like that and kind of brushes down his clothes, straightens his phantom tie. And he just starts walking towards the farmhouse. And she's watching him, getting closer and closer. He's 50 yards, then he's 20 yards, then he's 10 yards. Then she snaps out of it and she's like, oh my God. And she just starts pulling down all the blinds, closes the door. And just as she pulls the blinds and closes the door and does all the locks, she can just hear him, the footsteps mounting the
porch.
The porch, yeah. And it walks right up to the door and then nothing.
Oh God.
Yeah, and she's on the phone to Tim and everything, and she's explaining, and he's like, an RV? Where did the RV come from? He hasn't told her about their experience with the one that flew away, you know? Oh. But I think she might have heard from Dave, the nephew. Mm. But he's like, but where did it come from? And it's the first snows as well, you know?
Yeah.
But there's no tire tracks or anything. It just appeared at the other side of there. Like, the road comes in you know, to the house. And then the cottonwoods are on the other side of the house. So it just appeared down there, you know. And she's so distraught that he cuts short his business deals and drives for like 4 or 5 hours from the state he's in doing business to get back because she's so upset, and arrives in the middle of the night and there's no sign of anything. There's no sign of this RV or anything like that, yeah? And he goes into the house and he comforts her and everything like this, and she's really, really upset. And then the next day he goes out to where the RV is, and there's these massive 18-inch footprints all over the place.
Footprints?
Yeah, footprints. And they don't have any, like, you can't see, it's not like toes or anything, it's just plain, ordinary sole of a shoe footprints, like, with no markings or anything on them. Now, what do you think of that?
That's creepy.
Yeah. Things get pretty weird from here on out.
Oh no, weirder is it?
Yeah, I mean, that's where things start to get weird, yeah. Are we there or thereabouts, or do you want me to go on?
We've just had an hour, so I suppose we're gonna have to
We'll leave it there.
leave it there.
We'll leave it there, yeah. We'll leave
Big
it
old footprints. 18-inch footprints.
That's what they said, yeah, 18-inch footprints around where she said the thing. I just love the image of, like, you're looking out and there's like this 7-foot guy who's like filling in paperwork before.
Did he have one of the zappy things?
I have no idea, like, but I can imagine this guy in there, and he's like, why is it always on a Friday? Do you know what I mean?
I just want to get home to my family.
I know, and he gets out of the RV and he's like, I guess I better get on with this. Starts walking towards the house. I cannot reiterate enough, I don't even care how cheap the land was. If that wolf thing happened,
yeah,
I'd have gone. They go to a neighbour straight away, like the next day they meet a neighbour, you know?
Yeah. And
the neighbour's like, oh, hey, Gormans, I hear you guys are moving in next door. Well, you know, good luck with the ranch and all. And they're like going, we had a really weird experience with a wolf. It seemed like a tame wolf. And the guy was like, tame wolf? Nah. He goes, there are wolves on my property, you know, but like I'm not a rancher, but yeah, there's definitely a wolves on there or whatever, you know, and they never caused me any trouble or whatever. And they were like, okay, well, maybe it's one of those wolves then, you know. But they didn't go into detail because obviously if you say, I shot it with a Magnum 3 times and then shot it with a 30-06 and it made no difference. Do you know what I mean? I think he might have even taken a shot at the wolf while it was putting distance between them, you know? But anyway, like I'd be gone straight away when that happened.
Yeah.
Later on, when she experiences the thing with the wolf on her property when she goes in the gate, Ellen goes to the local police force, who are the reservation guys.
Yeah. And
she reports that this is the second time they've seen this massive wolf. And the guy is like, there are no wolves in Utah. Like, the last wolf in Utah was recorded in 1925, you know? Which is actually true at the time. But apparently the wolves that they released into Yellowstone have made their way into Utah over the generations. So there are wolves in Utah now.
Okay.
But yeah, like I said, at that stage, I'm out the door.
Yeah, but they probably spent all the money they had or something like that. You know, that's a kind of...
That's pretty much the size of it. Yeah, that's pretty much the size of it. Is there anything else that we could talk about? I think that's... It is more or less clear enough.
Somebody's been researching all night.
It gets...
Okay, well, don't... I mean, yeah, tease us.
Like I said, it's about to start getting weird.
So if you're interested in continuing to watch this series, stay tuned for next week's episode on the weird and wacky with Mr. Ray. No, thank you so much for hanging out with us today and watching me diamond paint on kimono. She's looking pretty good. I only got 2 colors done, but
it's looking good, all right, John?
Yeah. We're going to work on this for the month of February. Miss Coffee is doing a contest on her Instagram and on our Facebook page. #POC for Black History. Work on any craft with the subject as a person of color, and you can be entered in to win. Lots of stuff. Different gift cards and stuff. She's the one running it, so if you have questions, like I said, check out the links below. Thank you so much for being here, and I will see you all really soon with the next video.
Bye, everybody!
Take care. Bye!
Bye!